I woke up to an eerie silence, the kind that sends a shiver down your spine when you know something's wrong. Yesterday, my front yard had been stacked high with neatly bundled hay bales, golden and perfect for the season. But today they were gone, vanished as if a ghost had swept through in the night and taken them to the underworld. But I knew better. Ghosts don't leave behind tire tracks. I stormed outside, my boots crunching against the gravel, my gut twisting with the kind of fury only a man who's been wronged in the pettiest way possible can understand. That hay wasn't just for decoration. It was mine, paid for with my hard-earned money meant for my animals. I whipped out my phone and checked the security cameras, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might shatter. There she was, Karen Henshaw, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, standing in my yard like she owned the place, hands on her hips, barking orders at her army of HOA lackeys. They weren't even trying to be sneaky. They rolled up in golf carts, wearing their ridiculous matching polo shirts like some kind of suburban cult, and started hauling off my hay bales as if they were on a scheduled pickup route. Karen even had the audacity to inspect each bale, nodding approvingly like she was selecting the finest produce at a farmer's market. I watched in stunned silence as they piled my property into their carts, then sped off toward the town square, their electric engines buzzing like smug little bees. I took a deep breath, willing myself not to throw my phone against the nearest tree. Instead, I did the rational thing. I marched straight to the HOA office, where I found Karen sitting behind a desk as if she were a high-ranking official instead of a middle-aged woman with a vendetta against anything that didn't fit her definition of aesthetically pleasing. "Ah, Jake," she said, smiling in that condescending way that made my blood boil. "I was just about to call you. Your hay bales were absolutely perfect for our fall festival. Thank you for your generous donation." I stared at her, barely believing what I was hearing. "Donation?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "Karen, you stole them off my property." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be dramatic. They were just sitting there, cluttering up your yard. I assumed you wouldn't mind if we put them to better use." I took a step closer, gripping the edge of her desk to keep from losing my temper. "I didn't assume you'd mind if I parked my truck on your front lawn, but here we are, Karen." She huffed, clearly not amused. "Look, this is for the good of the community. Everyone benefits from the festival, and your hay bales make the perfect rustic touch. You should be honored that we chose your farm to contribute." I let out a dry laugh. "Honored? You're insane if you think I'm just going to let this slide. Either you return my property, or I'll be pressing charges for theft." Karen's smile faltered for the briefest second before she composed herself. "Oh, Jake," she said in the most infuriatingly patronizing tone I'd ever heard, "if you want to be difficult about this, I should remind you that there are zoning laws that require properties to maintain a certain appearance. That hay was bordering on unsightly, and the HOA has full authority to fine you for unmaintained clutter." My hands clenched into fists. "You're threatening me with a fine for the hay you stole." "It's just how things work in a civilized neighborhood," she said sweetly. I had never wanted to flip a desk in my life as much as I did in that moment. I knew arguing with Karen was pointless. She thrived on power plays, and this was just another one of her twisted games. If I stormed out of the HOA office with nothing but anger, she'd win, smug in her victory. But she underestimated me. I wasn't just mad, I was motivated. I plastered on the most neutral expression I could manage and said, "You know what, Karen, you're right. Maybe I overreacted. If it's for the community, then it's fine. Enjoy the festival." She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by my sudden change in tone. "Well, I'm glad you understand," she replied, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Oh, I do," I said smoothly, "and don't worry, I'll be sure to contribute even more to the festival. After all, community spirit is what matters, right?" Karen beamed, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm facade. "That's the spirit, Jake. See, the HOA isn't so bad when we all work together." I walked out of there with a plan forming in my mind so fast and so perfectly that I almost wanted to thank her for making this personal. She wanted hay. She was going to get hay, the real hay, the stuff that had been sitting in my barn for months, soaking up moisture, growing patches of mold, attracting all manner of critters. It smelled like a combination of rotting compost and death itself, the kind of hay no festival committee would ever willingly use as decoration. By the time I got back to my farm, my friend Tom was already there, leaning against my fence, chewing on a piece of straw, watching me with that knowing smirk of his. Heard Karen pulled one over on you, he said, spitting out the straw. I assume you're planning on pulling one right back. Oh, Tom, I said, grinning. I'm not just pulling one back, I'm about to burn her whole little festival to the ground, figuratively speaking, of course. His eyes lit up. This should be good. We spent the next several hours loading up my truck with the worst hay we could find, damp, crumbling, absolutely rancid. We even added a few extra surprises, stuffing the bales with hidden rotten eggs. The moment someone moved those bales, they'd be in for a very, very unpleasant surprise. When the sun set, we made our move. Under the cover of darkness, we crept into the festival grounds like two farm-bred ninjas. The festival wasn't set to start until the morning, which gave us just enough time to swap out every last one of my stolen hay bales with the filthiest, most putrid replacements we could find. As we finished up, Tom wiped his hands on his jeans, looking at our handiwork. I gotta say, Jake, this is some next-level revenge. You sure about this? I dusted off my gloves, taking a deep breath of the cool night air, relishing the anticipation of what was to come. Oh, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We hopped back into the truck and drove off, leaving behind what was about to become the most catastrophic festival in Willow Creek's history. The next morning, the town square buzzed with excitement as the Willow Creek Fall Festival kicked off. Parents wrangled their sugar-high children, vendors set up booths selling overpriced cider and pumpkin spice nonsense, and the mayor strolled around shaking hands like he was up for re-election. The centerpiece of the festival, however, was Karen's prized fall display, a picturesque arrangement of hay bales, pumpkins, and rustic charm, designed to showcase her self-proclaimed artistic vision. She stood proudly at the center of it all, beaming as she took credit for the ambience she had so generously provided. I stood at a distance, leaning against a tree, watching the scene unfold with the quiet satisfaction of a man who knew the storm was coming. Beside me, Tom sipped his coffee, his eyes glinting with anticipation. "This is going to be biblical," he muttered, nudging me with his elbow. I smirked. Patience. The first sign of trouble came when a group of children, excited to play in the hay, ran up and immediately recoiled. One particularly bold kid, probably about 8 years old, hesitantly poked at a bale with his shoe, then screamed as a small puff of black mold burst into the air. His mother, mid-sip of a pumpkin spice latte, gasped in horror as the smell hit her. "You, Mommy, it stinks," the boy cried, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd just touched something from the depths of a sewer. Nearby, a vendor selling caramel apples wrinkled his nose and took an uncertain step back. The aroma, once a crisp blend of cinnamon and pine, was now tainted by the unmistakable stench of damp rot and something far worse, something festering. Karen, oblivious to the growing concern, was busy gushing to a local news reporter about how she had personally curated the entire festival aesthetic when she was interrupted by a shriek. An older woman, dressed in her Sunday best, had attempted to sit on one of the hay bales for a photo opportunity. The moment she plopped down, the brittle, decaying structure gave way beneath her, collapsing into a cloud of dust, spores, and a smell so repulsive it sent her gagging. She scrambled to her feet, waving her hands wildly as something small and wriggling tumbled out of the broken bale and onto her lap. I didn't even have to see what it was. I knew. The woman's scream cut through the festival like a siren. "Oh, dear Lord, it's moving!" Karen's expression froze in confusion as more festival-goers stepped back, their noses wrinkling, their expressions shifting from festive delight to barely concealed horror. The hay bales, once a warm golden color, now revealed themselves in the daylight for what they truly were, damp, mold-ridden, and infested with God knows what. Then it happened. One of those kids who touches everything picked up a small, round object nestled in the hay. Before anyone could stop him, he squeezed it. The rotten egg inside the bale burst open with a wet pop, sending a spray of sulfuric slime into the air. The smell hit like a tidal wave. People gagged, covering their noses, while Karen, poor, oblivious Karen, was still trying to piece together what was happening. I could hear her shrill voice rising above the chaos. "What is that smell?" The answer came as another unfortunate soul brushed against a bale, causing the compressed layers of rot to shift, releasing another puff of dust and a fresh wave of decay into the crisp autumn air. The festival was unraveling faster than Karen could salvage it. A group of local influencers, who had come to take perfect aesthetic fall photos, were now scrambling for their cars, their plaid scarves held over their noses like makeshift gas masks. A vendor abandoned his cider stand, muttering something about biological warfare. The mayor, who had been posing for a photo near the hay display, visibly paled as he took a whiff and promptly turned on his heel, walking away like a man with absolutely no intention of being associated with whatever catastrophe was unfolding. Tom let out a low whistle. "Oh man, she's in the trenches now." I watched as Karen, finally realizing the magnitude of the disaster, attempted damage control. She clapped her hands, forcing a laugh, though her voice wobbled under the strain of barely contained panic. This is just a little mishap. It's natural. Hay is natural. Sometimes nature smells." Nobody was buying it. Lisa, my neighbor and the unofficial eyes and ears of the town, sidled up next to me, smirking. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about this, would you?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Me, I'm just here to enjoy the festival," she snorted. "Sure you are." As the chaos escalated, Karen frantically waved down one of her HOA lackeys. "Get rid of it! Get it out of here before the news cameras!" Too late. A local reporter who had been live streaming the event zoomed in on the disaster just as a second rotten egg burst. The camera caught everything: the horrified faces, the swarms of gnats rising from the decomposing hay, and of course the exact moment Karen realized she was being recorded. I'd seen a lot of expressions on Karen's face before: smugness, superiority, condescension. But this was new, pure, unfiltered panic. She almost looked human for a second, but I didn't feel bad for her, not even a little. Then came the final nail in the coffin. One of Karen's HOA board members, a particularly uptight man named Richard, had the unfortunate luck of stepping too close to one of the compromised Bales. As he shifted his weight, the entire thing collapsed under him, sending him sprawling onto the ground. In the process, his flailing hand knocked over a decorative scarecrow, which tipped into a cider barrel, which knocked over a stack of pumpkins, creating a chain reaction that sent half the festival display crashing down in a spectacular mess of rotten hay, smashed gourds, and sticky cider. The crowd collectively gasped. A second later, the murmurs started. I heard snippets of conversation from festival-goers trying to make sense of what just happened. Who set this up? Didn't Karen get all this from that farm? Oh my God, did she buy bad hay? Karen, still struggling to maintain control, shouted above the noise. Everyone calm down. This is just a minor issue. We'll have it cleaned up in no time. Then, as if the universe itself decided to put the final stamp on her failure, a large, rat-like creature scurried out from inside one of the remaining hay bales. It darted between Karen's feet. She shrieked, leaping back, her carefully composed image finally cracking under the weight of sheer disgust and horror. The crowd erupted, laughter, outrage, people clutching their stomachs either from gagging or from the sheer absurdity of it all. I simply watched, letting the moment wash over me like a warm autumn breeze. Tom, grinning ear to ear, clapped me on the back. "Well, I think that about does it." I nodded, the satisfaction settling deep in my chest. Karen had stolen from me, tried to strong-arm me, and believed she could get away with it unscathed. But nobody, not even the queen of the HOA, was above karma, and today karma smelled a lot like rotting hay. Karen stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, her carefully orchestrated festival collapsing around her like a house of cards in a windstorm. The rotten hay bales, the unbearable stench, the shrieking attendees, it was all unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The mayor, who had been trying to discreetly slip away unnoticed, was caught by a news reporter shoving a microphone in his face. His expression was tight, his patience clearly worn thin. "So, Mayor," the reporter began, struggling to keep a straight face as another round of gagging erupted from a group of vendors nearby, "is this the kind of event Willow Creek is proud to host?" The mayor cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as though that could save him from the smell assaulting his senses. "Well, obviously there have been some unexpected developments today. We, of course, support community-led events, but, this particular situation seems to have gotten out of hand." The reporter nodded, but she wasn't done. "Would you say this is a failure of the Homeowners Association's leadership?" Karen's head snapped up, her eyes widening in panic. "Absolutely not," she blurted, marching toward the cameras. "This is sabotage. Someone tampered with our beautiful decorations. This was an act of vandalism." The mayor took a step back, as if distancing himself from whatever train wreck was about to come next. The reporter tilted her head, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Vandalism? Are you saying the hay bales, which were confirmed to have been collected by the HOA from a local farm, were deliberately altered? Karen hesitated, realizing too late that she had walked herself into a corner. The footage of her stealing the bales had already made the rounds online and people were talking. A voice from the crowd shouted, "You stole those hay bales, Karen?" Another chimed in, "Didn't even ask, just took 'em like you own the whole town." More murmurs spread through the crowd, the outrage growing louder. Karen's face turned red as she tried to regain control of the narrative. That hay was an unclaimed resource. It was sitting there going to waste. We repurposed it for the good of the community. Someone interrupted her with a sharp laugh. "Yeah, then why does it smell like Satan's laundry?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, struggling for a response, but the damage was done. The people of Willow Creek were already forming their own conclusions, and none of them were in her favor. The mayor muttered something about addressing this later before making a swift retreat, leaving Karen to fend for herself. Meanwhile, I watched from a safe distance, sipping on a soda Lisa had bought me from a fleeing vendor. Tom stood beside me, arms crossed, looking more pleased with himself than ever. "You think she'll ever figure out it was us?" he mused. I chuckled. "Oh, she knows. She just can't prove it." Lisa smirked, watching Karen flail through her excuses. "Even if she could, she's got bigger problems now." And she did. The HOA board members, her own people, were starting to look at her differently. Richard, still picking hay out of his hair after his unfortunate tumble, was whispering furiously with two other board members. One of them, a severe-looking woman named Margaret, finally stepped forward and cleared her throat loudly. "Karen," Margaret said, her voice sharp, "we need to talk." Karen turned, visibly relieved. "Yes, thank you, Margaret. You see what's happening here. We need to find the culprit behind this disaster." Margaret held up a hand, cutting her off. "No, Karen, we need to talk about you." Karen froze. "Me?" Richard stepped beside Margaret, dusting off his sleeves. "We've had complaints for months, Karen. You've been pushing the HOA's authority too far. This is the final straw." Karen let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, come on, we've done great things for this neighborhood. People love our leadership." A voice in the crowd yelled. "We don't." Another added, "I just got a fine for having too many lawn gnomes. What kind of nonsense is that?" Someone else chimed in. "She tried to charge me for excessive holiday cheer last Christmas." The HOA board members exchanged glances, clearly realizing just how much resentment had been simmering beneath the surface. Margaret squared her shoulders, making her decision. "As of now, Karen, you are officially removed from your position as HOA president." For a moment there was silence. Then the entire festival erupted in cheers. Karen stumbled back, looking between them in disbelief. You can't do that. I built this HOA. I made it what it is," Margaret sighed. "Exactly." Richard pulled a folder from his briefcase, handing it to her. "We've already spoken with legal. The HOA bylaws allow for removal by board vote, and the vote is unanimous." Karen snatched the folder from him, flipping through the papers. "This is ridiculous. I won't stand for this." "You won't have to," Margaret said, "because you'll no longer be involved." The reality of her situation finally hit Karen, her face paled. She looked out at the crowd, but there was no sympathy. People were laughing, talking amongst themselves, already moving on from her reign. I, enjoying every second, decided now was a good time to make my presence known. I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, looking every bit the calm and collected farmer I was. "Tough break, Karen," I said, my voice light. "Maybe next time don't take things that don't belong to you." Her eyes locked onto me, burning with hatred. "You did this." I simply shrugged. "Me, I didn't do anything, just a humble farmer watching the community come together." She opened her mouth, ready to spit fire, but stopped. There was nothing left to say. She had lost. The town moved on quickly. With Karen out of power, the HOA announced immediate changes. Absurd fines were revoked, restrictive rules loosened, and people were allowed to enjoy their properties without fear of ridiculous citations. As for Karen, she didn't last long in Willow Creek after that. Within a few weeks, a "for sale" sign appeared in her yard, and rumors spread that she was moving to a stricter community where people appreciated structure. No one really cared enough to confirm it. I, however, couldn't resist one final act of poetic justice. The day before Karen left, I drove by her house and parked in front, unloading a brand new delivery of hay bales, this time fresh and golden, stacked neatly in her driveway. She stormed outside, fists clenched, ready to scream, but before she could say a word, I tipped my hat to her with a smirk. "Just keeping the neighborhood festive, Karen," I said, then drove away, leaving her fuming in the middle of her soon-to-be former front yard. For the first time in a long time, Willow Creek felt a little lighter, a little freer, and I finally got to enjoy my hay in peace. The festival fiasco became the stuff of local legend, retold at every diner and bar with a mix of laughter and disbelief. People still talked about the smell, the rats, and the moment Coren's rain came crashing down, literally and figuratively. It was a cautionary tale about overreach, petty theft, and the quiet wrath of a farmer scorned. My farm returned to its usual rhythm. The animals fed, the fields tended, and my yard once again adorned with hay bales that no one dared touch. Tom, ever the loyal sidekick, couldn't stop grinning every time we passed the town square, now free of Coren's gaudy decorations. "You know, Jake," he said one afternoon, leaning against my truck as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, "I think you might have started a revolution. Folks around here aren't so quick to bow to the HOA anymore." I chuckled, taking a sip of my coffee. "Good. Maybe they'll think twice before messing with a man's hay." Lisa, who'd taken to dropping by more often since the festival, nodded in agreement. "You should have seen the look on her face when that rat ran out priceless. I almost felt bad for her." "Almost?" I raised an eyebrow. She smirked. "Yeah, almost." The truth was, Coren's departure left a void that no one rushed to fill. The HOA board, now led by Margaret, kept things simple, fewer rules, more common sense. People started decorating their yards again, putting up gnomes and lights without fear of fines. It wasn't perfect, but it was better, and that was enough. As for me, I didn't need much, just my farm, my animals, and the satisfaction of knowing I stood up to the tyrant of Willow Creek and won. The days grew shorter as autumn settled in, and I found myself enjoying the quiet more than ever. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the stars emerge, Tom pulled up in his truck, a six-pack in hand. "Thought you might want some company," he said, hopping out and settling into the chair beside me. We cracked open the beers, the cold bottles clinking together in a silent toast to the chaos we'd caused and survived. "You ever think she'll come back?" he asked after a long sip. I shook my head. "Nah. She's gone for good. Too much pride to show her face here again." Tom grinned. "Good riddance, though I gotta say I'll miss the entertainment." I laughed, the sound carrying into the crisp night air. "Plenty of other Corens out there to keep us on our toes." He nodded, and we sat there in comfortable silence, the memory of the festival fading into the background like a bad dream. Willow Creek had moved on, and so had I, though I kept a few extra bales of hay in the barn, just in case. You never know when you might need to send a message, and I'd learned one thing for sure. Revenge, when done right, is a dish best served moldy. The weeks following Coren's exit turned into a kind of golden age for Willow Creek. Without her iron grip, the neighborhood blossomed in small, unexpected ways. Front yards sprouted quirky decorations. Flamingos, windmills, even a rusty old tractor someone turned into a planter. The HOA, under Margaret's steady hand, sent out a newsletter apologizing for past overzealous enforcement and promising a new era of cooperation. People took it with a grain of salt, but the gesture was enough to ease tensions. I'd see folks waving at me as I drove by, a nod of respect or maybe just gratitude for shaking things up. At the diner, old-timers slapped me on the back, chuckling about the hay bale uprising, while kids ran around reenacting the festival meltdown with exaggerated screams and fake rats made of socks. It was flattering in a way, but I didn't do it for the praise. I did it because Coren crossed a line, and sometimes you've got to push back to keep what's yours. Tom, of course, soaked up the attention like a sponge, retelling our midnight mission with embellishments that grew wilder each time. By his latest version, we'd wrestled a bear to get the moldy hay into the truck. One crisp morning, Lisa showed up at my farm with a thermos of coffee and a grin that spelled trouble. "You hear the latest?" she asked, pouring me a cup. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the porch railing. "What now?" "Coren's new town, she's already stirring the pot. Word is she's trying to ban porch swings because they disrupt the uniformity." I snorted, nearly choking on my coffee. "She'll never change," Lisa laughed. "Nope, but at least she's their problem now." We sipped in silence for a moment, watching the mist roll off the fields. "You ever think about running for the HOA board?" she asked, half serious. I shot her a look. "Me, I'd rather wrestle that bear Tom keeps yapping about," she smirked. "Fair enough, just figured you'd keep him honest." I shook my head. "Margaret's got it covered. Besides, I'm happier out here with the cows than in some meeting arguing about lawn ornaments." She nodded, and we let the conversation drift to lighter things. The weather, the harvest, the diner's new pie recipe. But her question stuck with me longer than I'd admit. Power wasn't my game, peace was. By late November, the festival was a distant memory, though the town square still carried a faint whiff of rot if the wind blew just right. I'd taken to keeping my hay bales closer to the barn, less for safety and more out of habit. One afternoon, as I was stacking a fresh batch, a pickup rolled up my driveway. It was Richard, the HOA board member who'd taken that spectacular tumble. He climbed out looking sheepish, hands shoved in his pockets. "Jake," he said, nodding awkwardly. "Richard," I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. "What brings you out here?" He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Just wanted to say, well, thanks for what you did. Karen was running us into the ground. Half the board was too scared to stand up to her. That festival mess, it gave us the push we needed." I studied him for a second, then shrugged. "Didn't do it for you folks. She stole my hay." He cracked a small smile. "Yeah, well, still worked out. Town's better off now." I nodded. "Guess it is." He hesitated, then added, "We're not all bad, you know. The HOA, we're trying to fix things." "Good to know," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He took the hint, tipped his head, and drove off, leaving me to my work. Maybe the HOA could change, maybe not. I'd believe it when I saw it. For now, I had hay to stack and a farm to run, and that was more than enough. Winter crept into Willow Creek, blanketing the fields in frost and turning the air sharp enough to sting. The town settled into a quiet rhythm, the chaos of the fall festival fatting into a story folks told over steaming mugs at the diner. My farm hummed along as always, cows to feed, fences to mend, and hay bales stacked safe and sound in the barn where no HOA golf carts could touch them. I liked it that way, simple, steady, mine. Tom swung by now and then, usually with a beer and a grin, still riding the high of our revenge plot. "You're a legend now, Jake," he'd say, leaning back in one of my porch chairs. "They're calling you the hay bale hero down at the bar." I'd roll my eyes and tell him to quit exaggerating, but part of me didn't mind. It wasn't about the title, it was about knowing I stood my ground and won. Lisa kept me updated on the gossip, dropping by with coffee and tailies of the HOA's latest attempts to win back trust. "They're hosting a potluck next month," she told me one snowy afternoon, her breath puffing in the cold. "No hay bales allowed." I laughed. Smart move. The for sale sign in Karen's yard came down in December, replaced by a moving truck and a new family who waved shyly as they unloaded boxes. I didn't bother introducing myself, not out of spite, just habit. They'd hear the story soon enough, everyone did. By then, the online clips of the festival disaster had racked up thousands of views, complete with comments like, "Karen got what she deserved," and "Who knew hay could be a weapon?" I didn't watch them much, didn't need to. The real victory was in the quiet of my farm, the absence of petty fines, and the sight of my neighbors, yards sprouting whatever odd decorations they pleased. Margaret's HOA kept its word, dialing back the rules and letting Willow Creek breathe. Richard even sent me a Christmas card, a stiff little note thanking me again for shaking things up. I tossed it in a drawer with a shrug, nice gesture, but I wasn't here to make friends with bureaucrats. Still, it was a sign things might actually be different, and that was enough to keep me from eyeing every golf cart with suspicion. One evening, as the snow fell thick and silent, I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee, watching the flakes bury the fields. Tom had just left, promising to drag me to the diner's New Year's party whether I liked it or not. I'd probably go if only to shut him up. The quiet stretched out, broken only by the occasional lowing of a cow in the barn. I thought about Karen, wondered if she was out there somewhere, terrorizing a new neighborhood with her clipboard and her rules. Wherever she was, I hoped she'd learned something, though I doubted it. People like her don't bend, they break, and she'd broken hard. Me, I'd bent just enough to snap back, and it felt good. The hay bales in my barn weren't just feed anymore. They were a reminder that sometimes the smallest things, pride, principle, a pile of moldy straw, can topple a tyrant. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was freer, and I'd had a hand in that. I finished my coffee, the warmth lingering as I headed inside, leaving the snow to cover the tracks of a year worth remembering. Tomorrow I'd check the herd, maybe haul out a fresh bale or two, just because I could. And if anyone asked why, I'd smile and say, it's for the community. They laugh, and I'd laugh, and that'd be the end of it. Some stories don't need a sequel.